motorcycle accident, was hit by a car, and fortunately the injuries are not life-threatening, but she's not able to be with us today. And I am Reverend Rebecca Turner, the pastor of Christ Church UCC in Maplewood.
Hello, my name is Minister Sonya Vann. I am a minister on staff at Christ the King United Church of Christ in Florissant, Missouri, as well as the executive director of Central Reformed Congregation, which is a Jewish congregation in the city of St. Louis.
Is that cool or what? Yeah, so Sonya has some really broad perspectives of both Christian and Jewish faith. And so she's an incredible asset for this congregation. My background is that prior to serving the congregation where I am right now, I was executive director of an interfaith organization called Faith Aloud, which specifically worked on issues of reproductive justice. And so it was my job to organize clergy and people of faith, to do advocacy, and to do a lot of teaching and create resources for religious resources for people to talk about reproductive health issues, including abortion. So on that, I think Sonya and I were talking just a few minutes ago and saying we're both all about intersections, and while this is the interfaith conversation, we don't believe that you can talk about religious issues without touching upon medical or biological or scientific or political or cultural issues. So we just don't believe you can silo religion off to the side and say, well, this is what we believe about abortion, therefore, the end. So I just want you to know that we're going to have a lot of time for questions, and we're both really comfortable just addressing whatever question that happens to be on your mind. We don't know if you participated in the other discussions that have already been on campus this week that are about abortion, but if you did and now you have more questions, bring them. If you didn't and you're like, oh, I should have asked it at the other one, no problem, ask it here. If we don't know the answer, we'll say so. If we have, some answers or some opinions, we'll also tell you that. Sonya, would you begin?
I would. Well, first of all, I just want to kind of give you what I refer to as my narrative and why this is an important issue for me. But so many issues are important, so I'm going to go into that intersectionality. I originally started out as an economist. So I really wanted to learn about funding, not from the way in which we speak about money, but not from the perspective of making a lot of money, but from the perspective of what drives us in our own ways of thinking about our culture, or how we use money, how we think about the larger picture of political usage of funding and so forth. So that's sort of the back framework that I operate out of. And from that point forward, I then got this sense that I wanted to go into organizing, and so I started organizing around educational opportunities in public schooling. So really around the funding of education around the state and other states. And then from that point, I answered a call to ministry and went to seminary. And in seminary, what I found is all of that background had a relevance in my understanding of theology and how I express the way that I love, care, and am compassionate for others. And that brought me into a sense of what is important to me and how do I think about it, and then how do I care for people whether they believe what I believe or not. And so for me, as a person who serves in a predominantly white denomination, as an African-American woman who also has had experience around reproductive health concerns, as a person who had to do infertility treatments, all this stuff. So it's a very important thing to me. But what really brought me to this subject is a very strong upholder of what I refer to as reproductive health, is that when I was in college, my freshman year, I had to have a lot of medical issues, and I needed to go somewhere, and there was no place that I could go that I thought was so that could hear me, and so I went to Planned Parenthood. And when I went to Planned Parenthood, and I didn't go to Planned Parenthood for abortion or anything like that, because I didn't think about that. I thought about the fact that it was, you can go here and have your OBGYN screenings, or you can have gynecological screenings and so forth, and that's what I wanted. When I walked, when I drove into the lot, I had to get past probably about 20 people yelling and screaming and everything, and I was taken aback by that. So I went on and I parked and I went in, and as I was coming out, someone literally threw some type of, I don't even know what it is to this day, but it was sort of like a jelly substance or what have you on me. And I was really afraid that it was something that was going to, harm me. And so I went to the ER. And it just sort of started this whole process for me of, what the heck was that? Because I was really, it was just not something that I dealt with for the majority of my life at that point. And so from that point forward, I just dug in. I dug in because I couldn't believe that people were going through this just so they could have access to reproductive health, period. But from there, I started to learn about what it is to be in this country and to not have access to abortion, and how that affects your economics, how that affects your cultural health, how that affects your mental health. And from that point forward, I became a staunch proponent of not just reproductive health rights, but also abortion rights as well. Because I understood at that point that the state of Missouri in and of itself has the highest rate of infant and maternal mortality rates. That means that women in the process of just birthing children die on a higher proportionate rate than any other state in comparison, as well as the children that they're trying to birth. And when we went back and started to do the research on this, as a matter of fact, my very first placement as a seminary student was in a place that they kept the records for the state of Missouri for infant and maternal health records at that time. Now it's called Generate Health, but back then it was known as a different name. And in that process, I learned so much more about what happens to women when they have no choice, right? They either have no choice about how their sexuality, how they sexually are in reproductive situations. They don't have access to Planned Parenthood, or they're so afraid because they know more about it than I knew when I walked through Planned Parenthood's gates, or they just don't know enough about their own reproductive health to even make those choices for themselves. And that all of these things that we're talking about are all a part of that issue, right? That you can't ban someone from having access to choice and not ban them from access of information as well. It's all together. And from that point forward, it was a major concern of mine that this is important. Now, you add the caveat that I now work as an executive director of a synagogue. And within the Jewish faith itself, there is a staunch belief that life begins at birth, with the first breath taken, right? Because that's the breath of life that we believe in the tradition and the Torah and Talmud tradition of Judaism, right? And so this idea that conception is the beginning of life within Judaism is not even a concept that they hold, okay? So this idea that the child's life would override the life of the breathing, living, soulful mother, right, is not something that Jewish people in and of themselves would agree in. So even in that theological framework, there are issues with the idea that a doctor would have the requirement by law in the state of Missouri to save the child over and beyond the mother. And so that's a huge issue for just me on both sides, because I feel strongly about my 27-year-old daughter, that she has a right to make choices for herself, that she has a right when she gets to the point of having deciding that that's what she wants for herself, that she has the right to make those decisions and have her doctor support her in those decisions as well. So I'll hold there and be quiet, because I could go on forever, that's not the problem. But yeah.
Thank you. So I'm a pastor in the United Church of Christ, and we believe Sonya is also a member of the United Church of Christ, and what our church actually believes about abortion is that women have full agency, that women are fully capable, and it is nobody else's right or privilege to make personal decisions about them and their bodies. It is only the woman's prerogative to do that. And so we believe very strongly in the agency of every individual, not just of women, but we say of women because men have always had that agency and women have not. And so all human beings have agency. And so United Church of Christ absolutely supports that in every way and always has. They haven't come to that lately. United Church of Christ became a denomination as a merger of other denominations in 1957. And in the very early 1960s, they made their first public statement in support when abortion was completely illegal in the country. Made their first official statement in support of women's right to choose abortion and to choose contraception, because in the early 1960s, women didn't have access to contraception either, or at least single women didn't. And it was a man had to sign that the woman could get the contraception, or a man had to, even if they found a doctor that would do an abortion in an emergency case, the man had to sign that it was okay for the woman to have the abortion. So the UCC has always said that's wrong. No man has the right to decide if a woman is going to live or die, and to take that right away from her. And nor can a man or any other entity decide if her body is going to be used for the purpose of giving birth. It is her decision when and if to have children. And with that, I'm going to throw in intersectionality here, most women who have abortions already have other children, okay? Most women who have abortions already have other children. So women who have abortions are the same people who have children. It's not an either-or situation, and it's really important to understand that. We're not just talking about teenagers. Teenagers make up a small percentage of abortions. It is women of all years of the reproductive, of their reproductive spectrum that do choose abortion, and it's for a really wide range of reasons that they make that choice. As a Christian pastor, too, I have found it really helpful, and a part of my role as executive director of Faith Aloud was training clergy to do abortion counseling with women who either were considering abortion or had an abortion and were struggling religiously with that decision that they had made because their religion was not so kind to women who made that choice. And so in talking to them, and always those were Christian women from conservative religious groups. And what I did is to say, who do we look to tell us, to show us the way in the Christian faith? It's Jesus. Jesus is the one that we look to in the Christian faith to say, well, what feels right and what feels wrong. And what I see in Jesus' life is, first of all, he never said the word abortion, and or even referred to it anyway. And it's not because it didn't exist in those days. It absolutely existed. There were many herbal remedies in the Middle East and in Europe for that were abortifacients, that were successful abortifacients, not dangerous. Some of the plants that were used have disappeared because they were used so often, and that gives you an idea of how well known it was. So I don't believe the idea that Jesus didn't know that abortions happened, and yet he never spoke about that. But what he did on many occasions is to speak to women who were being shamed because of sexual behavior, right? So, and in every case, Jesus stood up for the woman. Jesus was always on the side of the woman who was being shamed by religious authorities. And I see an absolute parallel between those stories, either the woman at the well or the woman who was so-called caught in adultery, or the, every time a woman that religious authorities were saying she's committed sexual sin, therefore she must be outcast or she must be stoned, Jesus stepped in the middle and said, no, let's see your sins. Tell us about yours. And so abortion was definitely, if it was a sin at all, it was no greater sin than any other person was committing. But what I see in every interaction between Jesus and women in those kind of situations is that Jesus had complete compassion, that Jesus did not shame, did not get into publicly shaming anybody, and did not say, God's not going to love you unless you, take all of these, remedial steps and say you've done something terrible, or go protest at Planned Parenthood, which we know churches in St. Louis area tell women if they come and confess that they have sinned and that sin is abortion, one of the things they tell them to do, well, then you have to go X number of times to Planned Parenthood as a protester. And so, I'm sorry, that's not Christ-like. There's nothing in the Bible that would in any way tell me that that is Christ-like behavior or belief. So that's as a Christian, that's where I ground my faith and my belief on this particular subject and any other issues for that matter. That the Christian faith should always be about compassion, especially toward those who are outcast, especially toward those who are in some way being shamed by society. Jesus was never about, let's uphold the rules of the society or the rules of the religion. It was always about, hey, the people are more important than the rules, right? So that's where I ground my faith on abortion, and I absolutely believe the Jewish teaching as well. And in Judaism, there's a word for the soul, although they would not say it's exactly soul, but that word is nefesh. When does, and that might be the same thing as personhood, okay? So when does nefesh happen in a being, in a human? And that is always when breath of God, and the word breath out of Hebrew is the same word as spirit. And so Spirit of God, or breath is breathed into the human being in the 2nd chapter of Genesis, and life happens. When God's breath happens in a way that the lungs then are fully activated and air is taken into those lungs, outside of the woman's body, that's when nefesh occurs. And because Judaism is historically a foundation even in the Christian faith, because Jesus was Jewish, that's a part of my teaching as well, that Jewish belief. Want to follow up with that?
I do. I want to kind of talk about, we talked about this idea of intersectionality, and I want to talk about even, so a little bit of my background is that I'm a womanist theologian, which means that I really look at the broad spectrum of those who are disenfranchised in our community and work from that point forward. Instead of working from the area of privilege down, I work from the area of disenfranchisement upward, right? In order to help people understand theology better, to help people better understand how we need to be more compassionate to one another. And I really strongly believe in the idea that we need to care for the least of these, first and foremost, right? And so in that understanding of intersectionality, even going back in our own historical beliefs around theology, many times we actually think that because you say that you're a Christian, that you believe the same thing. We would consider that to be dogmatics, right? That if you belong to this understanding of faith, that you believe the same exact thing. Well, we know that not to be. We know that's not true. We know that you can say that you're a Christian, but you can have a broad range of understanding of how that Christianity or how that Judaism or what have you plays out in your own life. And I'm really going to speak to what I know best, which is African American experience of theology and Christianity, and even for that matter, Judaism as well. At the end of the day, we know that in our country in particular, that African Americans predominantly came here because of slavery. But in Africa, we, just like in Judaism, right, back in the early antiquities and so forth, had access to herbal remedies and everything that helped us make choices for ourselves, right? And those choices meant that women in many tribes, whether that they be the Yoruba tribes of what are currently Nigeria and Ghana and so forth, or other tribes outside of that, the Igbo tribes and so forth, which were some of the ones that were heavily brought to this country when slavery was first beginning. Those women were actually a part of those tribes. They chose when they wanted to have children. They chose when they wanted to have intercourse with their spouse or their husband or whomever, right? And because of that, they got to choose when they could conceive as well, because they had an understanding about their own reproductive clock and their own reproductive rhythms and so forth. And so even in that cultural understanding that then came here to the United States, and you start putting the layer of slavery on top of that, and we know that slavery was a system and a situation whereby people were oppressed, and some of them were oppressed into reproduction, right? Because that's how we kept it going. And in that situation, women chose for themselves even then, right? Some of them decided, I'd rather die than have a child or be forced to have a child. Some of them carried children that they did not want and then watched those children be torn from their arms, right? Others carried children that they loved dearly, right? And saw those children ripped from their arms or killed or dying in childbirth or what have you. So women historically in other areas, even in our own country, in other faith beliefs, and even in Christianity, as many of them exchanged their understanding of their own tribal beliefs into a more Christian belief system that was sometimes pressed upon them as well, and others took it on freely because it meant they had more freedom, okay? Those things also started to intertwine, but that never meant that women gave up their right to reproductive health and choice. It meant that they believed themselves to be Christians, and they're still practicing, and we know that that's a large grouping of the faith world in this country now is African American Christianity, African American Judaism, African American Islam. All of that is a part of this. But at the end of the day, they all believed and brought with them this understanding that you still have the right to choose, right? And so as we go further into this, I wanted to, because I think that a lot of times we think that we're monolithic in many ways, right? That we all believe the same thing. But the truth of the matter is that there's a broad breadth and reach of understanding that's based off of our culture, that's based off of our racial traditions, our own personal narratives, and the theology that we hold dear here, right? And so much of that is an important part of this conversation, because as soon as one group tells us that this is the only way, then you've automatically disenfranchised everyone who doesn't believe the same way you do. And so when it becomes law, then it's even worse. And I'll go back to the statement I made about infant and maternity mortality, right? This conversation has been about, we have to have more children and everything. There's an economic piece about that, right? And the economic piece about that is that there are people who are fearful that we will not have enough people to support our way of life going forward. But the truth of the matter is that there are still children being born every day. Right? There's still more than enough children being born every day. And my daughter reminds me that we have too many people in this world, and that's the reason why ecological systems are failing, because the earth can no longer support the systems, right? But that's here, and that's, it depends on how you think about that. Does that mean you have a right to choose how many children you get to have? Maybe. If you love the world and you don't want you don't want them to thrive or you want them to thrive, the ones that you have at the same time. So who gets to make that decision for the way in which we believe? And I don't think that a state or a person or one theological framework should be the deciding factor on that. I think that I should have the right to take my ecological beliefs, my theological beliefs, my economic beliefs, and the personal need I have. I have one child for a reason, because that's what I wanted to be able to afford, so that she would have everything that I would be able to give to her, and I wouldn't have to struggle as much. And I made that decision, right? And I think that everybody should have the right to make that decision for themselves as well. That means you can have as many children as you want, or the least amount of children that you want, or none at all. But it should be the right based off of my understanding of how I see God in my life, how I worship, and how I believe that I care for this world as well.
Can we talk about the politics of it too?
Oh, you want to get me into politics?
Well, you're talking about the economics of it, and the people that are saying, well, we won't have enough, people to, and since I'm very much a baby boomer, we won't have enough young people to take care of all the baby boomers, or, to feed the Social Security system, or something like that as a rationale. I'm sorry, that is not a reason to bring a baby into the world in order to take care of the grandparents or great-grandparents. That is not an ethical reason to have a child. But beyond that, what I see as the real reason for the current political extremism around abortion is about race. Because far more white women have abortions than do people of color. Far more white women limit their families to just a couple of kids. And part of that is the extreme individualism of white culture that doesn't really incorporate family support and doesn't have intergenerational support, the way communities of color are so good at saying, no, it's a whole village that raises a child. And white women don't have that kind of support. It's like, you can afford this child or you can't. But then the people who politically do not want to see more people of color in our nation, period, are very, very concerned that it is white babies that are being aborted and that there won't be enough white votes. That's what it's really about. I think it's absolutely about who is voting. They have read all of the, all of the sociological and status, the census reports for the past 20 years, and they see that the nation will come to a point in the not so far distant future that we are not majority white. And that's what's got them scared, because if the nation's not majority white, it's not going to vote for white nationalists, right? And already we know the majority doesn't vote for white nationalists, but our system is such that it's not always the majority that has the say. But it's really ultimately about trying to control race in this country, as it has always been.
And I think before we open it up for questions, I want to make one statement, and that is that if you care so much about children, why are children dying at such high rates? Why are there so many children? Why don't we also care for the healthcare system? If we're going to feed into this idea of abortion being the standard of care, or the standard, then that means that we should also have economic support, political support that supports healthcare, education, right? And the funding that supports the children you want us to have. And if that's not there, not that that's, I'm saying that if it was, that should be a reason that you should control my body, but at the same time, that is not a balanced political ideal, right? It only serves one purpose, and that's what Rebecca's referring to, that one race of people would be the race that would be able to be solidified in our society more so than the act that we really want to care for children. We really want to make sure that children are safe. No, we need more children to believe that like we do, so that we can move an agenda forward. And that's still, again, I agree, not a reason to have more children. and to force abortion.
And because we haven't said it explicitly, let's also say the recent Supreme Court decision is absolutely institutionalizing one religious faith. By that decision on abortion, they're saying only one religious faith matters. And that is, and not just an affront, but it is or a disrespect, but it's also infringing upon my religious rights, her religious rights, all Jewish religious rights, Muslim religious rights, which support abortion up to 40 days of pregnancy in all cases, and anyone who simply doesn't agree with them, this one narrow religious viewpoint, which is not even the Christian viewpoint. It is absolutely infringing upon our religious rights. So I wanted to make sure we say that explicitly. Yeah, questions. How's our time? How much time do we have for Q&A?
Thank you both. It's 10:36, so we've got plenty of time. We have up to 75 minutes. A lot of these are going about 60 minutes, so even within that framework, we've got plenty of time.
Great.
Thank you both for a cogent reasoning with us this morning. Who has yeah, let's show our appreciation. Yes. We have time for questions and comments, and since you just spoke about the nature of the Supreme Court decision, I will just recommend an article that was the Sunday New York Times front page cover story about the twin threats to American democracy. One of them being the refusal of politicians to accept the results of elections, and the second is the counter-majorian setting that we're in. I'm paraphrasing. Counter-majorian in that the laws of the land are out of step with the majority opinion, and the Pew Research Council this summer pointed out of a survey that 61% of Americans who were surveyed are in favor of abortion rights. 2 of our last 4 presidents were chosen with less than a majority vote. There is a counter-majorian element to our democracy that we have to be aware of. So I just wanted to kind of extend from that point into that. But yeah, let's see, who's got questions or comments?
I sat in on one of the other talks, and one of the polls, or one of the graphs they showed, was just the opposite of what you said, that the majority of the abortions were from African American women. So what is the difference?
That's a good question. I would have to compare the research I've seen with that.
It was way higher. It was like 60%. And that's one of the things, too, that I always heard. They talked about right off the bat, the terms, being careful about the words you say. They were English teachers. And that's one of the things that the word Planned Parenthood is kind of one of those words, too. Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, was definitely a racist and not in favor of African Americans living. She had some other people or other entities that she wanted to see removed as well, like the Catholic religion and...
As is true for almost all of the ancestors of every white person sitting here.
As
mine
what?
Included.
As what?
Racist.
Not necessarily. But you wouldn't know that my grandmother rented a room to a black lady named Ruth, and the people in her town almost ran her out, but not my grandmother. She loved to have Ruth because she was a great Christian lady. So that was one of the things I grew up on, seeing that there was no difference between Ruth and I. That was a beautiful thing. But what about that? I mean, well, I'm seeing different things. I'm hearing different things from these talks. And that's what I thought. The first one was right, and then now I'm hearing something different.
Again, I would say that not seeing the specifics where they received that information, I only speak to this, and that is that the research that we have is that predominantly, whether it's underboard, right? So these are silent surveys that are taken of women. And particularly those women who feel very strongly about abortion rights. The majority of abortion in the past has always been about access, right? So if you didn't have access to it, that means you didn't know someone or you didn't have the money to pay for an abortion, then you didn't have access to a safe abortion. And so what we know to be true is that access comes with privilege. And more white women have privilege of money and access than anyone else. Furthermore, we also understand and know to be true that physicians have also helped in that process, and that Black people or people of color in this country have less access to health care than any other group. And so by those reasonings, I would say that I would argue that that is more than likely not the truth. Not just because of the research that I have, but also because of all of those pieces that come together that say that access, privilege, economics help funnel you into the ability to have an abortion more so than the fact that you're pregnant, right? Most people of color, either because of their religious beliefs or because of their cultural beliefs and because of their economics, don't have access. It's just not, fundamentally part of the culture in many ways. Again, going back to the idea that that within certain cultures, you believe you have this family and that the family is going to help you take care of it. So you don't think so much about, if I have this child economically, how am I going to be able to afford this child? Well, my grandmother had 6 grandchildren. My great-grandmother had 13. I can have these 4 or 5. I can deal with this, right? And everybody's going to pitch in and help. Society is changing, and we know that to be true. But I think that part of what has not changed is sort of this cultural, theological, layered system that says that we don't do that, right? Or we don't do that unless we secretly do it and everything. But in other cultures, and I'll say predominantly white cultures, that's been a part of their understanding. I don't know if any of you have ever watched Call the Midwife. Has anybody ever watched that show? It's one of my favorite shows, and one of the episodes showed where they were talking about this big debate about abortion in England, and one of the Trixie is her name, and she was in a hospital system. One of their nurses was in a hospital system that was a hospital of privileged women, not from where she was going, where she originally came out of, which they were dealing with very poor women, right? And so you had all of these women who were pregnant, but women were having something called D&Cs. That's a medical terminology for an abortion, but that's what the medical terminology is, right? And those D&Cs were happening, and the doctor was going in and just taking care of them, even though abortion was illegal at that time. And I use that story, that narrative, to talk about the fact that that's what's still happening in the larger part of privileged society, is that those who have access to health care have abilities to have abortions, but they're called different things, right? And so as much as I respect the rights of other people to disagree with me, I would disagree with them as well.
Yes.
I was at another Democracy Days talk, and I asked this question as well. It's more of a political science question, but I'm wondering if I can still get your opinions on it. So we were told that conservatives, one of their main ideals is conserving the tradition, right? Well, in the First Amendment, obviously religious freedom. With religious freedom, why is it that they're trying to bring religion into politics?
I'll just answer the last one. We're going to go there.
Because I think it's a complicated answer, but maybe some aspects of it are that at least by the middle of the 20th century, America was extremely religious. Okay, almost everybody attended religious services. That was probably a post-war kind of thing, and And so religion became a way to begin to manipulate the masses. And, you know, as Sonya was saying about, yeah, women of means have always had the privilege of finding an abortion, you know, whether or not it was legal, and nobody would care because people just looked the other way. It wasn't a big deal. But in the late 60s and through the 70s, in which I was alive, by the way, I remember, there became a strong political element that wanted to use religion and use those who were anti-abortion in order to get them to vote a particular way. And they obviously they've been really, really successful in doing that and attracting these one-issue voters. Or saying this has always been the American way, when that's ridiculous. It hasn't been. And you know, there was widespread when Roe v. Wade was decided. There was wide religious support among all the Protestant groups, especially for a woman's right to access abortion. And you know, that was the Southern Baptist Convention, of which I was a part in those years, you know, had held a national convention and said abortion is actually absolutely the woman's decision, not anybody else's. And obviously Southern Baptist Convention doesn't talk that way anymore, but that's what they said in 1974. And there was this really, really widespread support for abortion, for access to contraception, which was still relatively new, and you know, as in that same decade, of course, women were coming into the workforce. There was a lot more support for women simply achieving their own life goals and going to college, and you know, all of those things that prior to that time women weren't doing at really high rates. You know, it was a very patriarchal society that we had before that. And so all of those issues together, I think, are very threatening to some people. You know, the fall of the patriarchy is very threatening to some people. The rise of women in political power, in business, in every field is threatening to some people. And so whenever there is power and wherever there is threat, there's politics. And politicians begin looking for what are some wedge issues that we can get people to vote for us if we just say this. If we just say we're the Christians and they're not, then we get people to vote for us. So I don't know. Got any other thoughts on that?
I do. I have thoughts on that, but I really do think that we have to understand that political power, privilege, and all that is very much an ideology that comes out of what I refer to as white supremacy, right? This idea that we've tied after the civil rights movement, when, remember, the civil rights movement was really about getting a vote, having the right to vote as a citizen of the United States. And as the Voting Rights Act was signed, the shift happened in theology at that point in politics. There was this meeting of the minds, right, that says, you know, we need to figure out a way to tie in our theological agenda along with our political agenda so that we can have a pulpit, right, a place of power and stance that helps control the people in many ways. I think about, I like to use narratives to help to explain a lot of what I'm talking about. Has anyone seen the movie, The Book of Eli?
Yeah.
The Book of Eli is kind of a post, Holocaust type, kind of after a major bomb has gone off and everything and stuff. It's like all these kind of ragtag people. It's the modern day Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome for my age group. And so Denzel Washington's character is a blind character that is going through and everything, and he comes across this Gary Oldman's character, and Gary Oldman is looking for books. But he's not looking for just any books. He wants a copy of one book, and that's the Bible. And he doesn't believe what's in the Bible, right? And he doesn't care, but it's an interesting thing because the only Bible that he's ever seen is the Bible that Denzel Washington has, and it's in Braille. So he can't read it, right? Denzel Washington can get his mind. But Denzel Washington also knows this book by heart, the entire book. And so it's an interesting thing because Gary Oldman's character tells Denzel Washington, if you control the book, you control the people. I think that's what we're looking at, right? Because if you control and make me believe that this is what God desires me to believe and to do, then this is how I will vote. This is how I will act. This is how I will raise my family. These are all the things, and this is how we control people in many ways. But we all know, well, I know this to be true. God gives us a choice. We get a choice to decide if we even want God, right? And so for us to even sit here and say that it's a dogmatic belief that everybody has to believe it this way is fundamentally incorrect no matter what faith you serve. It's just not right.
If it were true, we all understood it one way, there would not be tens of thousands of Christian denominations.
Right, and even within Judaism, there's different levels of Judaism as well, right? There's conservative, there's reform, there's traditional, there's Hasidic. I can go on for days, but there's the same thing. And so and the interesting thing about Judaism is many of them, most of them, believe the fundamental idea of reproductive health and the right of a woman and to choose. That's the interesting thing about Judaism. Christianity is the one that's split, and I think that more so because of this idea of if you control the theological frameworks of people, you control their political vote, you control their belief systems, and you control what they do.
Yep.
All right.
Thank you for this presentation. Do you think there is some aspect to this issue that's really on a superficial level? For instance, to me it seems like we're giving some of these people way too much credit, that they're thinking about demographics and they're thinking about, the fact they can't change the demographic shift, but they're trying to. Most of them are not that smart. I think that you often use the issue of abortion or the Second Amendment as a smokescreen. We can do whatever we want, as long as we get people to vote us into office. And we'll get that by saying we're against abortion, or we're for, you having whatever you want in terms of an arsenal. That they often use those kinds of issues for that purpose.
Yes, I think it's both and.
Yeah.
I don't think everybody is smart, and everyone at the top of the political rung is smart enough to use all of the demographics and say, we're projecting out 50 years from now, this is what we're going to look like, we have to do this, this, and this. But I do think there are a few people that do that. And then, feed that, therefore we need to do these things. When you hear the same talking points over and over and over and over, the identical talking points from a whole political party and their favorite network, that there's somebody calling the shots, that there's somebody saying this is how we talk about it. But are a lot of people just like, if I say this, I think they at least use polling enough to know, okay, well, all of these people over here tend to think this way, so if I say I'm in agreement, if I say I'm a Christian, if I say I'm a born-again Christian, if I use certain code words, then I'll have a whole segment of the population voting for me because they're not thinking too critically about the issues. I think it's both and.
Here I come.
Here.
Are you not allowed that?
No, that's for the people in the back.
We have a live streaming so we can hear everybody.
Okay. So there was a woman, I think she was in Missouri, right?
I don't remember the specifics of it, but she had
A dead fetus?
she had had a miscarriage or something of the sort, and she had had a dead fetus, and because of state laws, she had to wait a certain amount of time and get certain different tests done to prove that the fetus was in fact dead, and this just caused more damage to her and almost killed her in the process. And I don't know what you want to ask, but I just
I can tell you a real similar story too that happened while I was with Faith Aloud, and we got a call, and there was a husband who called on behalf of his wife, and he was really upset, and he had been to, they'd been going to a Catholic hospital, and in fact, the fetus had died in utero, and the hospital would not remove it. This was years ago. This was before the current laws even. But it was a Catholic hospital. No, that's an abortion. We can't do that. And they refused. And yet it was, the doctor was absolutely saying you have to go ahead and remove it, not just for your own psychological well-being, but for your own health. We don't think your body is going to go into labor on its own. And you have to remove it. And yet, according to the Catholic hospital in the St. Louis area, that was an abortion. We can't do that. And so, they're like, we need to go to an abortion clinic. We don't even believe in abortion. I can't believe we have to go to an abortion clinic. He's telling me. But that's the reality. Yeah.
Similarly, when you just said that, I wanted to mention, I think a lot of people, when they talk about the statistics, I had this conversation with my dad recently, actually, about how many women are having abortions. I think a lot of people will use a certain number and be like, it's this high, but in actuality, because removing a dead fetus from a woman's womb is categorized as an abortion, then they think those numbers are higher, but really it's miscarriages. And I just wanted to bring that up because I think that's...
Yeah, and it could be that different places are statistically counting that in different ways, and I don't know. There's not, even from state to state, there's not that much consistency about the way hospitals or doctors report to their state health departments, and so it's hard to compare state to state exactly what's happening. But it has been true for a very, very long time that, first of all, the highest abortion rates were pre-Roe v. Wade, okay? 43% of women had abortions in the 1940s. It was completely illegal. 43% of women had abortions in the 1940s. After Roe, that number dropped a lot because contraception was also available, and so we know, and in some places even, good sex ed. Hardly ever in Missouri, but good sex ed. And so there were opportunities for dropping the unwanted pregnancy rate, which is really the key, right? But even if we were able to prevent every unwanted pregnancy, you're talking about wanted pregnancies that unfortunately, are really sad cases where the pregnancy cannot be brought to term. And yeah, that's still an abortion. The rates right now are at about 30% of women have abortions.
I think that there's something to be said that you're going there, to be said about what you're referring to, and that is the medical health of someone, right? And that a physician says this needs to happen. But political movements and theological movements have made a decision that it cannot happen. I think that in and of itself should tell you how terrible this idea is, that it's this way or the highway or no other way other than that, right? That my own doctor, who I've trusted with my health, cannot make a decision for me in concert with me for my own health.
By the way, you guys did an amazing job. So I have a question. How can young teenage boys help support young teenage girls and, kind of like our mothers, like women who's going through abortions? How can we support you guys, women that is going through that process?
What a wonderful question. You want to respond to that?
I do. I think for me, I'll say this, that I don't know what it is to live outside of Roe v. Wade until now. I was born in 1972, so my 50th birthday was this decision, to be honest with you. But what I would say is that someone who is there, do not, allow, hear and listen first and foremost, and then be proactive and supportive of their choice, right? I do believe that a couple has the right to make a decision together, but in the utmost, the woman has the right to decide what happens to their body, right? But in this situation, I would say that the support systems are there, and do your own research, because it's not just about, it's not just about a female. It's about mothers, it's about daughters, it's about sisters, it's about all of these peoples, our cousins. If you care about them, then you want to also know what their rights are, how to help them to get the access that they want, and being there is a listening ear, non-judgmental, but listening ear, I think is my point.
And speaking out among other guys, not being afraid to talk about women's health subjects among guys, and speaking out in such a way that your women friends always know you're a safe person to talk to, and that you've got their back, and that you will hold their secrets if they have secrets. And for everyone, speaking out is always key, because it gives signals to other people that it's okay to speak out, and that it lets people know who's safe. And so I think that's just so incredibly important. And and while I would also say, ultimately it's always a woman's decision, that doesn't mean men's voices are not needed. And it does not mean that a man who is in any kind of a romantic or sexual relationship with a woman, that his opinion isn't important on the subject, because she's going to want that opinion. She's going to be asking, if this isn't what we expected, what are we going to do? And she usually wants help and support with that. And so, women don't usually appreciate the whatever you want, dear, when they're asking a serious question, right? They're like, no, they want to talk it out. And so being a person that any woman could come and say, I just need to talk about this, and because they need to hear themselves going through all the options out loud, or maybe, you're the one they come to because you know something, that a phone call, a phone number, somebody who they could call to just talk to about it, or, and because reproductive health is about all of us. It's not just about women, it is about all of us. And speak out. I keep thinking, I know there's one other thing I usually answer when I hear that question, and I can't think what it is. But, okay.
Yes, thank you.
Also, do you think Roe v. Wade, do you guys think Roe v. Wade is going to come back? Or do you think it's going to be gone?
I think with the current Supreme Court, it's going to be quite a while before we can turn that ship around.
All right.
And that's scary, which means it's up to the states. The states have to be reasonable first.
And if we're going to even talk about that, right, let's talk about the fact that a state will govern. And we've had import-exports across states, right, for quite some time. We can sell products from one state and transfer to another legally, but we cannot decide for our bodies to go to a different state and make a decision if you live in the state of Missouri. Can we talk about that too, right? I don't think that Roe v. Wade will be overturned anytime soon. I'm concerned that it may not be overturned in my daughter's lifetime, to be honest with you. But I am a proponent of the fact that we have a right to that decision in those states where it is currently legal as well.
Good question. Necessary question. Yes. Who else?
Okay, if I could piggyback with that and just say there are a lot of laws that are going to be filed this fall in the state of Missouri for the next legislative session coming up in January, and those have to do with making it illegal, making it human trafficking if a mom takes her daughter across the state line to Illinois to get an abortion. That she can be charged with kidnapping that she can be charged with kidnapping the fetus, one of the laws says. You know, I mean, it's getting ridiculous. And it's really crazy where this is going to take us legally. You know, at what point is, if the fetus is a full human being, a legal human being, at what point is that a tax deduction? Before she knows she's pregnant? You know, because there's this stretch of time she doesn't even know she's pregnant, right? And yet there's something there. And so if she might have been pregnant, charges could be brought. If she did not, you know, if she took a drink of alcohol and then later was determined to have been pregnant at that time, but she never knew it, she could be charged with endangering the life of a fetus. You know, there's so many layers to this that is so dystopic. It's so, it's really unfathomable how crazy it's possible for this to get. It's not just about whether or not you think abortion is murder. It's really not just about that. It's so much bigger than that.
Dystopic is a good word to use, especially when there's this element of snitch culture.
Yes.
Reporting on other people.
Yes.
And that, to me, is one of the hardest things to understand, because history is a guide. We do know what happens to societies when snitching is encouraged.
People die.
I saw a hand. Would you like to?
So I feel like a fetus, it can't really live by itself. It needs like the mother to give it like food and oxygen and stuff like that. Like when you take the fetus out, it dies, but like when
It's a
born,
parasite.
It's like itself. Yeah.
It is.
That's what I thought. I didn't want to
Technically,
say it.
biologically, it's a parasite.
I just didn't want to say it like that.
One of my church members here can tell you that I will always say the thing that people are afraid to say.
And I also want to just talk about this idea of where the laws are going. You know, culturally, I think about, I want to talk about sort of the parallels of Judaism and even slavery in this country. You know, there was this whole idea, they're just rounding up a couple of people. They're just making a decision.
They must have done something wrong.
They must have done something wrong, right? You know what? The people next door are harboring slaves, right? They're bad people, right? The people over here are harboring Jews. We have to tell on them because that's how we make sure that we're safe, by making sure we tell on other people, right? This whole idea that it can't get any worse is something I really want to put forward, because I also believe in the right to vote and the rights that we all should be voting against those things that are disrupting our personal lives, right? The idea of our right to choose and our right to not live in a snitch type of society is an important piece of this America that we have seen kind of disappear over the years, right? This idea that if you don't fall into this political movement, then you are out, or you're disenfranchised from the success and privilege of that which is America, even though we need to really talk about what privilege and success really is in America, right? We need to redefine what that means. But in many ways, I think that we have to be aware that we have to start action now. We can't wait till it gets so far down the line that it's unbearable and we can't do anything about it, but it has to start now. And so as young people, and I don't put myself in that anymore because again, I just turned 50, but as young people, I just encourage you to vote. Never miss the opportunity to vote. And these votes don't start when they become a state issue or they become a federal issue. They start at the very county, at the very city that you
Started
live
the
in.
banning the books in the school districts level.
Right.
Every election is important.
Right.
So I have something that's maybe slight observation, but slight, I'd like to know your thoughts on it. So my background is I was brought up in a fundamentalist homeschooling community for the beginning of my life. Students don't know this, surprise. But anyways, so there was a lot of women had many children. And there was kind of this idea that I noticed growing up that if you died in childbirth, that was almost like dying in war. And it was like a very noble thing. And like I have 2 children now, and I think a live mother is the best mother for them. But I was wondering if you see that belief being mainstreamed in any way. And that's my observation/question.
I have heard the comment many times of, you know, when the argument comes forth about, you know, when a fetus is a threat to the mother's life, that I've heard the argument on the other side that says, well, any mother would give her life to save her child. So there's that I think is real similar to what you're saying, you know, that, well, we ought to, you know, if the baby can live so and we die, then of course we should give our lives for that baby. But I think, you know, the other parent in the situation and the other children in the situation, remembering that most women who have abortions are those who already have other children. You know, I think the family structure is that they need that woman alive. And as we've said, in our religious traditions, and that's, you know, she is a living, breathing entity with agency of her own. Therefore, her life must come first in that situation.
I think that we have to be careful in many ways about how we honor certain things, right? Do we also say that a mother who's sitting on the front porch holding her child who gets shot in a drive-by shooting should be honored as well in the same way? Mm-hmm. But do we do that? No, right? Mm-hmm. I think that we have to be careful about the honors that we want to place on people because of how they died. I think that it's better for us to live for the life and help those who are living, right?
And to grieve all those.
Yeah, and honor all of those in many ways.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Our time is up, so we do need to adjourn, and thank you so much for this encounter on this vital issue.
Thank you everyone for coming. You're a great audience.